Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you and welcome to Islam and Life with me, Tariq Ramadan, broadcasting from London. In today's show we ask the question, how can Islam and work in the West go hand in hand?
A report published by the All-Party Parliamentary Group revealed that Muslim women in particular are encountering discrimination across all stages of the recruitment process, from the application stage, interviews, recruitment agencies, and then finally in the workplace. This issue is not only confined to the UK. In the United States, retailer Abercrombie & Fitch was taken to court for refusing to allow a Muslim employee to wear her headscarf. The retailer argued that the hijab, worn by Muslim women as a sign of modesty, would negatively affect sales. McDonald's was forced to pay a Muslim employee, Shahid Khan, $50,000 for refusing to allow him to grow a beard for religious reasons. Mary O'Neill, an attorney working for the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission in the United States, described the discrimination against Muslims in the workplace as chilling. Discrimination isn't the only problem. It has been said Muslims face challenges on a daily basis, such as attending social engagements that conflict with the religion, for example, after-work drinks and praying in the workplace. This week on Islam and Life, we ask, how can Islam and work in the West go hand in hand?
There are many problems when it comes to the workplace for men and women, when it comes to Muslims and how they have to deal with their companies and how they have to deal with their colleagues at the workplace. The first thing that we are facing, of course, is discriminations. And it's true that in France, for example, if a woman is wearing a headscarf, she has to understand that there is no way for her to find a job, and especially if she has to work for the state, no veil, no headscarf in such positions. In Britain, it's better than in France, for example, and you have differences in Europe, but still, when you wear a headscarf, it's quite difficult to get a job, or you can face discriminations. Add to this anything which has to do with position and promotion within a specific company, it's very difficult. And just surrounding all this, everything which is done on socializing, for example, is a problem when the people are drinking alcohol, when the culture is the pub culture, and people have the feeling, if I don't do this, I'm not going to be promoted, and the perception is, if I am a believer, I still need to find places where I can pray. During Ramadan, there are things that Muslim women or men cannot do, and all these together could create a sense of alienation sometimes and discrimination on the other side. How should the Muslims deal with this? How they can be involved in their enterprise culture and the company's culture, and how do they have to socialize and at the same time respect the Islamic principles without compromising? These are difficult questions and critical questions that we have to tackle because this is the real question. Is there a contradiction in terms between being a Muslim and working in the West? To answer all these questions, I'm joined by my guest, journalist and commentator, Sharif Nashashibi. Thank you so much for being with us today. Let me start with this. You are a Muslim, you live in the West. Do you feel, do you get the sense of all what I was trying to say in this introduction as something which is real, that you can feel at the workplace and at the grassroots level among the Muslims?
I mean, personally, if I've ever felt a sense of alienation, it's been more because I'm an Arab rather than I'm a Muslim. But in terms of for instance, fitting in with other employees, I remember when I used to work in the city, you know, I'd be invited every evening to go have drinks after work, and I never went because I don't drink. And you know, I remember one day they came up to me and they said, well, you know, you're very mysterious. And I said, no, there's no mystery. While you're drinking, I'm in the gym. You know, it's no mystery. But I did feel not really part of the rest of the group. They didn't discriminate against me, but just by virtue of the fact that I wasn't drinking with them every evening, I kind of felt a little bit, well, not like the rest of them. So there are certainly cases, I mean, for me being an Arab and a Muslim, where sometimes you feel that either it's a case of your religion splitting you apart from the rest, or your race, or, you know, these are issues of discrimination. There are many levels of them. And sometimes they are very overt, sometimes it's very difficult to prove that that's the case. But, you know, I hear many stories from friends as well, where particularly in their younger age, where they have some very quite shocking stories of the way that they're treated by other colleagues, by their bosses. So it's something that definitely needs to be tackled, but we have to also keep in perspective, since we're talking about whether Islam is compatible in the Western workplace. I mean, many millions of Muslims in the West work every day and contribute to society. So, of course, it's not incompatible. But that doesn't mean that there is a very real problem that we have to tackle in terms of discrimination.
Yes, that's a very important point. The great majority of the Western Muslims in the United States of America, or in Europe, or in Australia are working, and they are finding their place. Now, we also have discriminations. We also have some women. It happens in France because they are wearing a headscarf, and it's not possible. But even in the UK, what we have now, it's this problem. So what would be your advice? How do you think that we need to tackle the issue when it comes to discrimination, even before talking about socializing, you know, after working together, and we know that this has an impact on you being involved in the culture of the companies and your workplace. Before that, they are facing discrimination. What should they do? How do they have to deal with this? Because at the end, if you are told, you know what, your beard, it's not going to work, your headscarf is not going to work, your color is not going to work, is there a new way of dealing with this, something that has to be done?
There are several levels of how to deal with these issues. You know, for instance, if you're encountering a problem with a colleague, the first thing you should do is to speak to the colleague directly about if you have a problem with the way that you're being treated. If that doesn't work, then speak to your superior. If that doesn't work, the human resources department in the company. And ultimately leading up as a last resort to an employment tribunal, if you feel that the company is simply not is discriminating against you and not willing to meet you halfway. An employment tribunal is a last resort, and beyond that, even if you feel that the employment tribunal has not given you the justice you think you deserve, then there is the European human rights courts as well. So there are many levels. You know, first.
But this is when you work already. But
yes.
If you are discriminated before even being hired. So,
the problem with this is it's very difficult to prove. You know, but if you've not got a job, it's very difficult to prove that being Muslim is the reason you didn't have one, because most employers will never say, I don't like you because you're Muslim. Even if that's the case, they could make up any other reason why you can't get the job. It's very difficult to prove, and that's one of the fundamental problems, is that you might get the feeling you're being discriminated, but it's very hard to prove that that's exactly why, because people won't admit it, even if internally they have that prejudice.
So what can be done? Because at the end of the day, you have Muslims. It's quite clear that you have Muslim women, and mainly, as it was said in the clip, it's that they are facing such a discrimination. So at the same time, there is a celebration in the West. You have to have women working in the workplace, and it's about empowerment. And when they try to be involved, because they wear the headscarf, which is in fact a signal, yes, I am a believer, I work, I wear the headscarf, but I want to work. And then they are prevented from doing
I mean, I think it's quite important. There is a growing number of studies being done. For instance, where people will send various companies identical CVs, one from a person with a Muslim-sounding name and someone with a very Anglo-Saxon-sounding name, and to see the discrepancies and how much more likely the kind of the non-Muslim is likely to get job interviews and ultimately the job. And I think these studies are important because they should be used as a way to potentially name and shame organizations that seem to have this bias against not employing Muslims. I think this is a first step, and there are more and more studies that all come to the same conclusions. But I think that companies should be made aware that people are mindful of their employment practices. And if there are these studies that show that certain companies have this bias, then this has very big implications. So I think that is the first step. to showing that they can't do as they please in terms of hiring people based on race or religion or ethnicity or anything like that.
So everything which has to do with the legal procedure is important to do before and while you are within working within a company. This is something that, and are you seeing things that are improving on that, or is it still that the many of the European or the Western Muslims are still very passive when it comes to claiming or working for their rights?
What I've found, I mean, it's anecdotal, but from my experience and from the people I've spoken to about this, is that any incidents that we have encountered of being discriminated against have happened in our earlier years in employment. Maybe because employers might feel that as young employees we're maybe naive or less likely to raise an issue when we simply want to have a job and contribute and earn money. I haven't encountered in my older years that kind of experience, and neither have other people. So I feel that maybe that this happens more when people are younger, because maybe colleagues or employers think they can get away with it. And certainly I remember at the time when I've experienced things like that, I never raised the issue. And it angers me now that I didn't. But at the time, I don't want to risk my job. It's a tough employment market.
Which is what is happening now, yeah.
Yeah, so people are silenced into thinking, what, I don't want to rock the boat, let me just keep my job. And then I know when people have gotten older, when we talk about it, we think, we wish we'd done something. But maybe it's easier said than done. We're older, we're more confident now. But this, I feel, is a particular problem for the youth.
But would you say, for example, that something should be done from within the Muslim communities in the West as something which is institutionalized, much more professional? Let's say we're not going to let this go, because at the end, this is not good. Not only it's bad for the Muslims, it's bad for the society. It means that we have a structural racism or Islamophobia that we have now within the society, and this is normalized.
There are initiatives increasingly by Muslim organizations to highlight your rights as an employee, to highlight obligations of companies and employers. So basically outlining the steps that you can take to deal with any issues you might find, your legal rights, things like that. There is more and more information that's easily accessible online for how to deal with that didn't exist to that extent before. So I think there is a heightened awareness, or attempts at raising awareness of what you can do when you face this, because it can be quite a daunting thing when you're in a company and you have an issue based on your religion. It can be very difficult to know how to react. So there is more and more information now as to exactly what steps to take and how to make sure that any effort you exert does achieve a result.
So that's very important. The second point that we were mentioning at the beginning, which is still very important, is that you got the job, you are within the company, and it happened to me. I was a teacher, and when I started as a young teacher, they were drinking and inviting you to come, and this is where you can find two different attitudes. People very respectful, say, okay, they do everything that they can to make you feel good, and others where you can see it's just creating something with just sense of otherness when it comes to the workplace. And it cannot work like this, because socializing, it's very important. Many Muslims are asking about the limits and the pop culture, which is everywhere, where you end up drinking and doing things with your colleagues that are not Islamic. How do you think that we have to deal with this? Because this is a deep problem. It's a psychological problem here as well.
This is particularly difficult because you are dealing really with issues outside the workplace. I mean, just you might feel alienated from your other employees because they say they go drinking after work, but you can't expect them to change their behavior after work. That's what they used to do, and that's their right to do that. So that's particularly difficult because that's outside work, and they have as much right to drink if they want as you have a right not to drink. So this is very difficult. I think in the workplace you have more set kind of rules and obligations and legal precedents about what to do if there is an issue in the workplace. Beyond that, it's difficult.
But would you, for example, because this is also what we have with some, very literalist trends saying, you don't go. You do your job, you go to the workplace, this is what you have to do, this is your duty, anything else, it's not. And you have people saying, that's true. if you go for the legal framework, that's true. These are your obligations, but not to be in touch with people. And at the end, if you don't socialize, it's a vicious circle, because the image of Islam through your behavior is, oh, they are different, they don't want to mix, they don't want to interact, and they are silent. As it was said to you, you are mysterious.
Yeah.
Mysterious could mean anything, in fact. So how would you...
I think it's down to individual choice. I mean, everyone who adheres to a religion interprets it in their own way. Some people I know would have no problem, some Muslims would have no problem to go to a bar with their employees and not drink, but just be around them anyway. Some people wouldn't go to the bar at all. And some people will drink with their other employees. So it's down to your individuality, how far you want to take it. If you don't feel comfortable, or you feel comfortable, do what is comfortable for you. From my experience, although I didn't join my colleagues, they would still invite me, and they were still very nice about it. And if it means that I socialize less with them, well, so be it. I have my interests, and they have theirs, and life doesn't end at the workplace. So this may just be a necessary inconvenience that people have to tolerate, that socially people are different, whether it's by religion or other issues. People are different, so there's individually you'll come to some kind of consensus as to how to best...
Yes, and the other way of being creative in finding way of socializing, not going to parties.
Yeah, I mean, companies organize sporting events, quizzes, there are many other things that people can participate in, and religion has no bearing on it. So.
Yes, and this is quite important to let the Muslims understand that they can find other ways of interacting with people, which is important in itself. Yeah. There is a last point here, which is also important, is that at the workplace, we know that in some countries, for example, it's even not possible when you are fasting or when you need to pray. No places that, it's a secular place, so forget about getting a space to pray. And when during Ramadan you don't eat, it's very difficult to see your privacy or what you want to be during Ramadan being protected. How do you see this? You are a young Muslim living in the West. Do you see that there are more respect, it's more possible to get this? Because at the end, if you have to pray 5 times a day, you need to find a way to work, to pray at the workplace, or at least to deal with the director or whoever. And then at the same time, during Ramadan, it's quite difficult.
Well, I think we need to separate. There are legal obligations that employers are under, but then there are other things that employers are recommended to do, but they are recommendations, they're not legal obligations. For instance, prayer times, time off on religious holidays, things like that. It's recommended that they try and accommodate employees. But again, there is also an onus on employees to realize that there's a limit to how far employers can go in terms of business running smoothly. And this is, again, it's on an individual case-by-case basis. There's no strict line about how you cross that. Yeah. So these are not particularly legal obligations, but it's in the interest of employers and employees to come together and find reasonable ways of coming around this, where your religion will be respected, but also the operation of the business is respected as well. Again, it's a fluid situation, so it's really a case-by-case basis.
Yes, but implicitly what you are saying, which is very important, is when it comes to working against discrimination, there is a factor which is a psychological factor. You never know exactly, because they're not going to tell you it's because you are Muslim. So you need to get the legal framework, but at the same time to deal with a dialogue, to be able to talk to the people. What you were saying about, for example, socializing, it's always based on dialogue. It's always based on listening and speaking out. And the same here when you are saying it's the legal framework, but at the end, this is not going to be always solved by the legal framework or the internal rules that a company could have. It's the dialogue. And very often what we have coming from the Muslims is a victim mentality, is straight away starting by, I'm not liked, I'm targeted, and we need to get rid of this. So how can we promote such an understanding?
That's a good point you raise. I mean, it's a problem. I've encountered this not just in the Muslim community, but you know, other minority communities where, for instance, if someone doesn't get a job or even doesn't get served in a restaurant or something like that, many people tend to say, "Oh, it's because I'm Muslim or because I'm, you know, black or whatever, you know, Jewish," and you know, without any real evidence for it. So it's a tricky balance. We have to be very wary of times when we are genuinely discriminated against, but not immediately have this reaction where if something doesn't go your way, then you must assume that that's because of your religion. You know, that's dangerous, because then that you know, if people cry wolf too many times, and when there are real cases of discrimination, people don't pay attention. So it's a case of not immediately assuming that you're being discriminated against. There might be other valid reasons, and you know, often, for instance, in job interviews, they don't have to tell you exactly why. So it's very difficult, and I think, you know, some people are recommended that, you know, when you take on a job or at the job interview, if you have any very specific religious requirements, like for instance, if you will not handle pork products and you're going to work in a supermarket, that, you know, you should tell them, because this is very important to the day-to-day running and to your job, that that's a requirement. But then I can understand that some people wouldn't want to be too specific about their religion because they don't want to jeopardize their employment prospects. And in this economic climate, it's very difficult. So it's a tough issue because there isn't a very black and white way of dealing with it. It's all very individual. But I mean, what I will say is just read up on your rights, you know, when getting a job, before getting a job, so that you know exactly how to deal with the situation as it arises.
Thank you so much. I think if we start with your final words, which are very important, the victim mentality, not to start with this, the mindset should change, but it's also something where it's, as it is not clear, it's not right or wrong, it's not legal versus psychological. What you said, it's important is for everyone to set her or his values and principles, and to be clear about that, and at the end to know what is the framework within which they are dealing with a company and a business or whatever, and then in between it's all a question of dialogue. It's take and give, listen, and when it comes to getting the job, when it comes to within the company with the colleagues or the directors,
there must be dialogue.
And yes, and socializing beyond. It's also a question of creativity. What you said, it's very important. It's a case. It's one per one. It's very much a case per case situation where psychology is as important as the legal framework. Well, that's all we have time for. Please let us know your thoughts and views on any of the shows you have seen, and here's the way to contact us.
We at Islam and Life would like to hear your views about the subjects that we discuss. We would also love to hear your suggestions for our program, so get in touch with us. You can also share your thoughts with other Islam and Life fans, engage in debate, and find out how to watch our previous shows. Follow us on Twitter at Islam and Life TV, or join us on Facebook by liking our page Islam and Life on Press TV.
Finally, I would like to thank my guest, Sharif Nashashibi. Thank you so much for being with us and your input, and I hope to see you next week, inshallah.